So guys, what I got behind me here is a pallet jack, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to use this correctly. And so here we got our manual pallet jack, and there's a couple things. You steer it right here. It's got two small wheels in the back and one big wheel in the front. And when you pump the jack, it lifts it up. Now there's a couple things to keep in mind. You got this nice little lever here, and this controls whether it goes up or down. When it's in the down position, the forks will begin to lift when you pump. When it is in the up position and you squeeze it in, it will lower those forks, right? So this is how you're going to be lifting your pallet. Now there's a couple things to keep in mind. Whenever you're working with a pallet jack, especially if it's around trucks or other heavy equipment, you want to be making sure you're wearing a high visibility vest or that you're easy to see because you don't want to get ran over. Another thing to keep in mind is you're going to be moving things that are very heavy, and this wheel here is pretty unforgiving, so you want to make sure that it doesn't run over any toes, any of your coworkers' toes. You want to make sure people aren't standing around the pallet when you're going to be dropping the pallet, and you want to just practice overall good safety. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be showing you guys how to lift and move this particular pallet behind me, and without further ado, let's get to that. So when I come up on the pallet, I want to make sure that my forks are in a down position, and then I can push them into the pallet, right? So when I push it into the pallet, I want to make sure I'm as far in as I can go because that creates more surface area to lift with, right? So there's more forks touching more boards across the pallet, and that's going to keep you from breaking and damaging your pallets. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are different sizes and shapes of pallets, just like there are different sizes and shapes of pallet jacks and forklifts. So you can have close forks, wide forks, normal forks, all different kinds of forks. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that lever, I'm going to put it in the down position so we can begin lifting up this pallet. So as I start to jack up the pallet, you'll see it will eventually begin to lift off the ground. And once it lifts off the ground, we now have a pallet that can be pushed, pulled, and moved about, right? So with this, I want to say a couple things. First thing is, when possible, keep two hands on the pallet jack. That gives you a little more control, a little more ability to move. Make sure you have a wide base so that way you have a little bit of power. Now, if you're going to be dealing with inclines and declines, something to keep in mind is that you may have to stop this pallet. I've seen a lot of videos online where people tell you to do this. Not a good thing to do because obviously if you're on a decline, this can roll and roll over your feet. It can hit other people. It's not good. So if this thing starts getting away from you at any time, just squeeze and drop the load. Just drop the load because that's the way you're going to be least likely to hurt somebody. The other thing to keep in mind is remember what your surroundings are. Make sure to make wide turns like a truck, right? This thing is heavy. It's going to knock things over. It can damage other merchandise. It's important to be very careful with your movements. And finally, when you're dropping the load, make sure that everybody around you knows that you are about to drop the load because people can fit their toes and their fingers and other things underneath the pallet, and sometimes if you're not paying attention, you could harm somebody or something by dropping it prematurely. So, once you have this thing lifted up, you can kind of pull it, right? I like to use my legs instead of my back to move the pallet, and, you can look and see where you're going, and you steered to get it where you want to go. And once you have the pallet in position, right, like let's say this is where I want to stop, right? All I do is I squeeze that handle in and I drop the load, right? But I made sure nobody was around me, nobody was going to get hurt before I dropped that load. So, this is a pretty basic introduction to how a manual pallet jack works. The biggest thing is to keep safety in mind at all times. It's a pretty simple device once you understand down is up, squeezing in drops the load, and